The HOA tried to steal my backyard. Now their president is gone and they owe me thousands. They let the whole neighborhood trespass, tried to claim my land as a public path, and even sued me for blocking it off. But I fought back, won in court, and now? Their president was removed. The HOA is paying for my legal fees, and my fence is here to stay. They thought they could take what's mine. Now they're the ones paying the price. Jake had always dreamed of a place where he could escape the noise of the world, a home that felt like a true sanctuary. After years of hard work and careful planning, he had finally found it, a beautiful house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, nestled at the end of a peaceful cul-de-sac. The property was everything he had hoped for. A spacious backyard stretched beyond his patio, leading into a small wooded area that added to the sense of privacy he cherished. Over the years, he had landscaped it with care, planting flowers along the tree line and making sure the grass remained healthy and green. It wasn't just a yard to him, it was an extension of his home, a place where he could breathe, unwind, and enjoy the serenity of nature without interruption. That peace, however, was about to be tested. One bright morning, as Jake stood on his back porch with a steaming cup of coffee in hand, he noticed something unusual. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but no, there they were. A group of neighbors casually walking through his yard. It wasn't like they were lost or had taken a wrong turn. They walked with the confidence of people who had done this before, chatting as they cut across the wooded area behind his house, heading toward the main road. One of them even had a dog trotting alongside them, its leash dragging through the grass as if they were taking a morning stroll through a park. Jake furrowed his brow. What the hell? He had never invited anyone to use his property as a shortcut. Why were these people acting like they belonged here? Then, as if to make things even stranger, one of the women in the group turned and waved at him. "Morning, Jake," she called out cheerfully, as if greeting an old friend. Jake squinted, trying to place her face. He vaguely recognized her, Karen. She was well known in the neighborhood as a board member of the Homeowners Association, HOA, and, according to local gossip, one of those people who thrived on being in control. Jake had only spoken to her a handful of times, mostly in passing, but he knew she had a reputation for being nosy and over-involved in everyone else's business. What was she doing on his property? More importantly, why did she act like it was perfectly normal? The others in the group followed suit, giving Jake polite nods as they continued on their way, cutting straight through his yard like it was a public sidewalk. Jake watched them disappear toward the road, still gripping his coffee mug. His first instinct was to brush it off. Maybe they were in a hurry and had taken a shortcut just this once. But something about Karen's casual wave bothered him. It wasn't the wave of someone sneaking through unfamiliar territory. It was the wave of someone who believed they had every right to be there. And that unsettled him more than anything. At first, Jake told himself it was a fluke, a one-time thing. Maybe just a few neighbors taking a shortcut in a hurry. But as the days passed, he realized that wasn't the case. Every morning, afternoon, and evening, people kept cutting through his yard like it was some kind of public pathway. What started as a trickle became a steady flow. Retired couples out for their evening walks, parents with strollers, kids racing ahead of their families, all using his private land without a second thought. Jake tried to stay patient, watching from his porch as they walked along the same trail through the wooded section of his yard, their footsteps wearing down the grass he had spent years carefully maintaining. The worst of it came one afternoon when he saw a group of teenagers speeding through on their bikes. Their tires left deep tracks in the soft dirt, kicking up clumps of grass as they laughed and raced each other like they were on some sort of BMX course. Jake's jaw clenched as he watched one of them nearly crash into a sapling he had planted 2 years ago. This wasn't just a mild annoyance anymore. This was blatant disrespect for his property. Frustrated, but wanting to handle the situation calmly, Jake decided it was time to speak to Karen. She had been among the first he had seen crossing through, and if she was a board member of the HOA, maybe she could help spread the word that his land wasn't for public use. After all, this had to be some kind of misunderstanding, right? So one morning, he caught up with her near the HOA bulletin board at the neighborhood park, where she was chatting animatedly with another board member about something to do with lawn decorations. "Karen," Jake started, keeping his tone polite, "can I have a word?" She turned, arching a perfectly manicured eyebrow. "Jake, isn't it? From Maple Drive?" she asked, her voice dripping with the kind of forced warmth people used when they didn't actually care about your answer. "Yeah, that's right," he said, forcing a small smile. "I wanted to talk about something that's been happening on my property." Karen tilted her head, her expression shifting to exaggerated concern. "Oh dear, is something wrong with your house?" I hope it's not a maintenance issue. We always encourage homeowners to stay on top of that. Jake exhaled through his nose, already feeling his patience thinning. No, it's not the house. It's about the wooded section at the back of my property. I've noticed a lot of people cutting through there lately. It's private land, but it seems like it's being treated as a public path. Karen's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Jake to notice. Then, just as quickly, she recovered, waving a dismissive hand like he had just told her the sky was blue. "Oh, that," she said lightly. "Yes, people have been using that path for years. It's such a convenient shortcut to the main road. I'm sure you understand. It's part of what makes our community so connected." Jake's jaw tightened. "I understand it's convenient," he said, choosing his words carefully, "but it's also private property. I don't feel comfortable with so many people crossing through without permission." Karen's smile disappeared completely now, replaced by a look of mild incredulity. "Jake, with all due respect, that path has been there long before you moved in," she said, crossing her arms. "It's practically a community asset." "Karen," Jake said firmly, "it's not a community asset. It's my land. I have the deed to prove it. I'm not trying to be difficult, but I need people to stop using it." Karen's lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "I see," she said, her tone cooling noticeably. "Well, Jake, I'll make a note of your concerns, but you should know that paths like these often fall under something called prescriptive easement. It's a legal concept. If people have been using it long enough, they might have rights to it." Jake stared at her, stunned. "A prescriptive easement? Are you serious? This isn't some ancient trail. It's my backyard." Karen shrugged, her posture stiffening. "I'm just saying, Jake, you might want to consult a lawyer before making any rash decisions. The HOA has always considered that path part of the community." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional. The conversation ended on a tense note, with Karen striding off as if she had just handed down a royal decree. Jake stood there, still processing what she had said, his frustration boiling over into something sharper. Karen was wrong, and Jake was about to make sure everyone knew it. Jake had tried to be diplomatic. He had approached Karen with the expectation of a reasonable conversation, hoping that as a homeowners association board member, she would understand his concerns and help put an end to the trespassing issue. Instead, she had brushed him off like his property rights were nothing more than an inconvenience to her vision of the community. The conversation had left a bad taste in Jake's mouth, but he wasn't ready to let it go just yet. If Karen was truly in a position of influence within the HOA, then maybe he needed to approach her in a more formal setting, somewhere she couldn't dismiss him so easily. That's how he found himself at the next HOA meeting, standing in a crowded room filled with homeowners, board members, and a handful of nosy neighbors who clearly had nothing better to do. The meeting was held in the neighborhood's community center, a modest building with beige walls and a long table where the board members sat like a panel of judges. Karen, of course, was front and center, speaking in her usual clipped, authoritative tone as she discussed some minor issue about mailbox aesthetics. Jake waited patiently, arms crossed, until the meeting opened for community concerns. As soon as the floor was available, he stepped forward. "Good evening," he said, keeping his voice calm and controlled. "I wanted to bring up an issue regarding my property." Karen turned toward him, feigning polite interest, though Jake didn't miss the slight roll of her eyes. "Of course, Jake. What's on your mind?" He took a breath, knowing he had to be direct. "It's about the wooded section behind my house. Over the last few weeks, I've noticed more and more people cutting through my property as if it's a public pathway. I wanted to bring it up here because I believe the HOA has some influence in letting people know that this land is private property." Karen smiled, a tight, controlled expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, that," she said, like he had just mentioned a minor inconvenience rather than an ongoing problem. "Yes, that path has been used by the community for a very long time. It's a convenient route to the main road. I assumed you were aware when you bought your home." Jake's patience thinned instantly. "I was aware that I purchased a home with a backyard. I wasn't aware that my backyard was considered a public sidewalk." A few muffled chuckles came from the audience, but Karen's smile didn't falter. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, as if speaking to a child who didn't understand the rules. "I understand your frustration," she said, her voice dripping with forced sympathy. "But you have to see it from the community's perspective. That path has always been there. People rely on it. It fosters connection between neighbors. It's just part of what makes our community special." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Karen, it's private land. My land. It's not a community feature. It's my backyard." I'm asking that people stop using it." Karen's expression finally shifted, just for a moment. The friendly mask cracked, replaced by something sharper. "Jake, you have to understand that some things are bigger than just one homeowner's personal preferences. There's something called prescriptive easement. It applies when a path has been used for a long period of time, sometimes decades, without dispute. In cases like that, the path can legally be considered public, regardless of ownership." Jake felt a cold flash of anger rise in his chest. She wasn't just brushing him off. She was actively trying to justify people trespassing on his property. "You're seriously trying to tell me that just because people have been cutting through my yard for years, they might have a legal right to keep doing it?" Karen shrugged in a way that was almost condescending. "I'm just saying, you might want to check with a lawyer before you make any rash decisions." The HOA has always recognized that path as part of the neighborhood's natural layout. Jake held her gaze, jaw clenched, feeling the heat of 100 unspoken words. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Karen wasn't unaware of what she was doing. She was deliberately pushing back, hoping he would roll over and accept it. That wasn't going to happen. "Noted," Jake said stiffly. He didn't wait for her to dismiss him. He simply turned and left, feeling every eye in the room on him as he walked out. He had heard everything he needed to hear. Karen wasn't going to help him. In fact, she was the problem, which meant it was time for Jake to take action himself. The very next day, he went to the hardware store and bought a set of bold, unmistakable private property, no trespassing signs. He placed them strategically along the path, making it impossible for anyone to accidentally walk through without realizing they were on private land. If words weren't enough to get people to respect his property, then maybe clear warnings would do the trick. And if they didn't? Well, then Jake would have to make it even clearer. Jake had hoped that the private property, no trespassing signs would send a clear message. And for the first few days, it actually seemed to work. The usual foot traffic slowed down, and for the first time in weeks, his yard felt like his own again. He could sit on his porch, drink his morning coffee, and not have to watch a parade of neighbors cut across his property like it was some kind of community park. But his relief was short-lived. One evening, as Jake returned home from work, he immediately noticed something was off. One of the signs near the edge of the wooded area was knocked over, laying flat on the ground, bent and partially crushed. Another one, which he had posted closer to the trail, was completely gone. Someone hadn't just ignored them, they had actively removed them. His first thought was that maybe it had been an accident, a gust of wind, a curious animal, maybe even kids being careless. But the more he looked at it, the more obvious it became. This was intentional. Someone had seen the signs, decided they didn't like them, and made sure to get rid of them. Jake's frustration boiled over. This wasn't just inconsiderate anymore, it was deliberate defiance. Someone wanted to make sure he knew that his property rights didn't matter to them. He spent the evening reinforcing the remaining signs, hammering them deeper into the ground and replacing the missing one with an even bigger sign. He hoped that this time, people would get the message. But the next morning, Karen made sure he knew exactly where she stood. As Jake stepped onto his back porch with his coffee in hand, he immediately saw her. There she was, walking right through his yard, completely ignoring the signs as if they didn't exist. She wasn't even pretending to be subtle about it. Jake clenched his jaw. She wanted him to see this. "Karen," he called out, his voice sharp. She didn't stop, didn't even acknowledge him. She just kept walking, head held high, a smug sense of purpose in her stride as she made her way toward the main road. That was it. Jake had tried to be reasonable. He had tried to handle things the right way. But now it was clear, these people weren't going to respect his property unless he forced them to. He was done with signs. It was time for a fence. Jake didn't make the decision lightly. He knew it would be expensive, time-consuming, and would probably stir up even more trouble with Karen and the HOA. But he also knew he had no other choice. If people weren't going to respect the boundaries he set, then he would make sure those boundaries were physically impossible to ignore. The next morning, Jake called a fencing company and scheduled the installation. By the end of the week, his property line would no longer be up for debate. The crew arrived early in the morning, unloading stacks of wooden panels and posts onto Jake's property. He had spent the last few days going over measurements, checking regulations, and making sure there was absolutely nothing the HOA could legally do to stop him. The fence was going up, and once it was done, there would be no more shortcuts, no more trespassers, and no more headaches. He watched as the workers got to setting the posts, their drills humming, hammers striking, the sound of construction cutting through the morning air like a battle drum. It was the sound of his boundaries finally being respected. It didn't take long for trouble to arrive. Karen stormed onto his driveway before the second post was even in the ground, her arms crossed, lips pursed in that signature expression of someone who was about to make a scene. "Jake," she snapped, barely hiding her fury. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Jake didn't even bother to hide his irritation. "I think it's pretty obvious. I'm building a fence." Karen's eyes flicked toward the construction crew, then back to him. "You can't do that." Jake exhaled slowly, already tired of this conversation before it had even begun. "Karen, it's my property. I can do whatever I want with it." She took a step forward, pointing toward the wooded area like she was presenting evidence in court. "That is a community path, Jake. People have used it for years. You can't just block it off like this. Do you have any idea how inconvenient this is for the neighborhood?" "Inconvenient?" Jake let out a short, humorless laugh. "Karen, people have been trespassing on my land for weeks. They've ignored my signs, trampled my grass, and even removed my property markers. But now that I'm actually doing something about it, I'm the problem." Karen's jaw tightened. "The HOA won't stand for this. You're violating the spirit of this community, and if you don't take that fence down, there will be consequences." Jake crossed his arms, holding his ground. "Go ahead, Karen. Call the HOA. Call whoever you want. But unless you can show me a legal document saying this is public land, the fence stays." Karen's face darkened, her hands curling into fists. "You'll regret this," she hissed, before turning on her heel and marching away. Jake watched her go, shaking his head. He had expected pushback, but he wasn't going to be intimidated. The fence was going up, and nothing Karen or the HOA did was going to stop it. The letter arrived 3 days after the fence went up, tucked inside an envelope stamped with the official HOA seal. Jake knew exactly what it was before he even opened it. He stood in his kitchen, coffee in one hand, HOA letter in the other, feeling his irritation grow as he unfolded the paper and began to read. "Dear Mr. Reynolds, it has come to our attention that you have recently constructed a fence along the pathway that connects Maple Drive to the main road. This pathway has been a recognized community access point for years, and your recent actions have caused significant inconvenience to your neighbors. Furthermore, this fence is in direct violation of community standards set forth by the Homeowners Association. As per HOA regulations, any modifications to property that impact the community must receive prior approval from the HOA board. Your failure to seek this approval constitutes a breach of HOA guidelines. You are hereby ordered to remove the fence within 14 days to restore access to the pathway. Failure to comply will result in daily fines and potential legal action. Sincerely, Karen Whitman, HOA board member." Jake let out a long, slow breath, reading the letter again just to make sure he wasn't imagining the sheer audacity of it. They were seriously threatening him? For building a fence on his own property? He had triple-checked. His house wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. They had no legal right to dictate what he did with his land. But Karen, of course, was trying to bully him into submission anyway. He wasn't about to let that happen. Jake grabbed his phone and called Lisa Carter, his attorney. Lisa had handled his home purchase and was no-nonsense, sharp, and extremely good at her job. "Lisa," Jake said as soon as she picked up, "I just got a letter from the HOA demanding I take down my fence. They're threatening fines and legal action." There was a brief pause, then Lisa chuckled. "Let me guess. Karen." "Bingo." Lisa sighed. "Jake, this is classic HOA overreach. They don't have jurisdiction over your property. Have you reviewed your deed recently?" "Yeah," Jake said. "Nothing in it ties me to the HOA. No easements, no shared access agreements, nothing." "Good," Lisa said. "Then this is total garbage. They can't enforce a rule on a property they don't govern. I'll draft a response letter making it clear that if they continue this nonsense, we'll take legal action against them for harassment." Jake grinned. "I like the sound of that." Within 24 hours, Lisa had a professionally worded response letter ready, outlining the legal boundaries of his property, the HOA's complete lack of authority, and a very firm warning that any further attempts to interfere would be met with a lawsuit. Jake printed out multiple copies and mailed them straight to the HOA. He hoped that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, another letter arrived, this time signed by multiple board members. The tone was even more aggressive than before, filled with complaints from concerned neighbors. According to the letter, the fence was an eyesore that ruined the neighborhood's aesthetics. It obstructed emergency access, making it a potential safety hazard. It had damaged the community spirit by making the neighborhood feel less open and friendly. It had led to increased traffic on other streets because people now had to take longer routes. Jake actually laughed out loud at that last one. Increased traffic? Because he wasn't letting people trample through his yard? Unbelievable. Karen and her cronies were desperate. Jake knew exactly what he had to do. If they were going to keep pushing, he was going to face them head-on. He marked the date of the next HOA meeting on his calendar. This time, he wasn't just going to sit back and let Karen run the show. He was going to shut this down once and for all. The community center was packed by the time Jake arrived. Folding chairs were arranged in rows, all filled with neighbors who had shown up for the monthly HOA meeting, some curious, some annoyed, and others clearly there just for the drama. At the front of the room, behind a long table, sat the HOA board members, Karen right in the middle, her usual air of self-importance practically radiating off her. Her expression was calm, confident, smug. She thought she had already won. Jake had other plans. As the meeting began, Karen wasted no time steering the discussion to the issue of the fence. She stood, clearing her throat, and in her best politician voice, launched into a performance. Neighbors, we have always prided ourselves on being a connected and welcoming community. Unfortunately, one resident has taken actions that directly contradict that spirit. The fence built behind Maple Drive has not only blocked a vital neighborhood pathway but has also caused unnecessary division among us. We have received multiple complaints regarding this matter, and as a board, we believe it is our duty to address it. Jake folded his arms, feeling his blood simmer as murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd. She was twisting the entire situation, making it seem like he had attacked the neighborhood instead of defending his own property. She was good, he had to admit. Manipulative, but good. She turned toward him, tilting her head in mock sympathy. Jake, would you be willing to explain why you felt the need to disrupt a pathway that has been used for years? Jake exhaled slowly, keeping his voice calm but firm. Sure, Karen. I'll explain. But first, let's clarify something. This was never a community pathway. It is private property. My property. He reached into his folder and pulled out the deed to his land, survey maps, and official documentation. This is my legal deed, confirming that the wooded section behind my house is fully within my property line. Here's the survey map, proving there is no easement or shared access agreement. And here is the legal letter from my attorney, confirming that the HOA has no authority over my land. So let's stop pretending that this is about community spirit. This is about you, Karen, trying to control something that was never yours to begin with. A wave of whispers spread through the room. A few people craned their necks to get a better look at the documents. And for the first time that evening, Karen's polished demeanor cracked. She hadn't expected him to come prepared. Jake, she said, her tone tightening, we've been over this. That path has been used for decades. That's what's called a prescriptive easement, meaning if a path has been used long enough, it can legally be recognized as a public right-of-way. Jake didn't even hesitate. Wrong. A prescriptive easement requires legal action and court recognition, neither of which has ever happened here. Long-term use does not automatically grant public access to private land. That's just how property law works. He turned, addressing the rest of the room now. I understand that this was a convenient shortcut for some of you, but convenience doesn't override ownership. This fence isn't about me trying to cut the neighborhood off. It's about me protecting my land from repeated trespassing. I tried polite signs, and they were ignored. I even spoke to Karen directly, and she dismissed my concerns. The only option left was to put up a physical barrier. A few neighbors nodded, while others whispered to each other, clearly reevaluating the situation. Then, a voice from the back spoke up. If it's his land, why is the HOA involved at all? Shouldn't this be a private matter? Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She hadn't expected anyone to challenge her. The HOA represents the interests of the community, she snapped, trying to regain control. It is our duty to ensure harmony and address disputes. Jake seized the moment. This isn't about harmony. This is about control. You're trying to enforce rules where you have no legal standing. You're using the HOA to push your personal agenda, and frankly, it's time people start questioning why. The tension in the room shifted. Some residents were still wary, but others were now looking at Karen differently. A few even whispered to each other, nodding in agreement with Jake's point. Karen's face reddened, her grip tightening on the papers in front of her. Seeing her struggle for a response, another homeowner, an older man in the front row, cleared his throat. I don't know, he said slowly. This sounds like something we shouldn't be meddling in. If it's his land, it's his land. Maybe we've overstepped here. Karen's jaw clenched. She knew she was losing them. but she wasn't the type to admit defeat. "We will continue reviewing this matter," she said briskly, already moving to wrap up the discussion before it got worse for her. "In the meantime, we encourage residents to remain patient as we consider the next steps." Jake didn't miss the way her hands trembled slightly as she stacked her papers together. She had lost this round, but Jake knew better than to think this was over. As the meeting wrapped up, some neighbors approached Jake, quietly expressing support, while others avoided eye contact, still unsure where they stood. But the most important thing was clear: Karen's control over the room had cracked. Jake had stood his ground and won. For now. The morning after the HOA meeting, Jake stepped onto his back porch with his usual cup of coffee, but something felt off. The neighborhood, which was normally alive with early joggers, barking dogs, and kids getting ready for school, was eerily quiet. No one was outside. No one was walking past his property. It was as if the entire community was holding its breath, waiting. Jake knew why. Karen had lost control of the meeting last night. She had been challenged, exposed, and humiliated. But Karen wasn't the type to back down. If anything, losing in front of the neighborhood probably made her even more determined to win. By midday, Jake was proven right. A police cruiser pulled up in front of his house. Jake watched from his porch as two uniformed officers stepped out, adjusting their belts, scanning his property. A few houses down, Karen stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, lips curled in satisfaction, watching like she had just played the winning card. Jake exhaled, setting down his coffee before heading down the porch steps. He met the officers at the edge of his driveway, keeping his expression neutral. "Good afternoon, officers. Something I can help you with?" The taller officer, who looked to be in his late 40s with a professional but neutral demeanor, nodded politely. "Afternoon, sir. We received a call regarding a potential dispute over access to a public right-of-way on your property. Would you mind answering a few questions?" Jake glanced over at Karen, who pretended to be deeply interested in the cracks in the pavement. He turned back to the officers, keeping his tone calm. "I'm assuming the complaint came from my lovely neighbor over there?" The second officer, a younger man with sharp eyes, glanced at Karen and smirked slightly. "We're not here to assume anything, sir. Just trying to sort out the facts." Jake nodded. "Understood. Well, I can make this really simple for you." He gestured toward his house. "Would you like to come inside? I've got all my legal documents ready to go." The older officer exchanged a glance with his partner before nodding. "That'd be helpful, yes." Inside, Jake led them to his kitchen table, where his property deed, survey maps, and legal correspondence with the HOA were already neatly stacked. The officers skimmed through the paperwork, the younger one tapping the survey map. "This shows the path is entirely within your property lines," he noted. Jake nodded. "Exactly. There is no easement, no shared access agreement. And I've had my attorney confirm that the HOA has no jurisdiction over my land. The fence is legal, and I have every right to keep people from trespassing." The older officer scratched his chin, giving a slow nod. "Seems pretty clear-cut to me." The younger officer turned to Jake. "Just to confirm, you put up no trespassing signs before the fence?" "Yep." "And they were ignored?" "Yep." The younger officer sighed and shook his head. "Figures." They stood and followed Jake back outside, where Karen was still lingering on the sidewalk, looking smug. As the officers approached her, her arms uncrossed, and she stepped forward, already gearing up for another argument. "Well," she demanded, her voice clipped, "are you going to do something about this?" The older officer gave her a level look. "Ma'am, we've reviewed Mr. Reynolds' documents. The path is on private property. He is well within his rights to build a fence." Karen's face reddened instantly. "But what about the community? This has been a public path for years. People need access to get to the main road." The younger officer cut her off, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Ma'am, that's not how property rights work. If you believe you have a legal claim, you'll need to take it up in civil court. Calling the police over a property dispute is not an appropriate use of emergency services." Karen's eyes widened in outrage. "So you're just going to let him block everyone off? Just like that?" The older officer shrugged. "That's the law, ma'am." Karen huffed, arms crossing so tightly it looked like she was trying to keep herself from exploding. Her mouth opened like she wanted to argue more, but the officers were already turning back toward their cruiser. The younger officer gave Jake a small nod. "You're in the clear. If you have any further issues, don't hesitate to call." "Thanks, officers. Appreciate your time." As the police car pulled away, Karen turned toward Jake, Her expression twisted in pure fury. "This isn't over," she hissed. Jake just smirked. "It is for today." Karen spun on her heel and stormed off, heels clicking furiously against the pavement. Jake watched her go, feeling a mixture of amusement and exhaustion. He had won this round. But knowing Karen, she wasn't done yet. A week after the police incident, just when Jake thought things might finally settle down, an official-looking envelope arrived in his mailbox. The return address was from a law firm representing the HOA. Jake tore it open and scanned the contents, his jaw tightening as he read. They were suing him. The letter accused him of blocking a historic public easement and demanded the immediate removal of the fence. It threatened fines, legal action, and even possible court-ordered access restoration. The HOA wasn't just being petty anymore. They were desperate. Jake let out a slow breath, grabbed his phone, and called Lisa. "They're suing me," he said, voice flat as he read the ridiculous claims out loud. Lisa laughed. "Called it. Classic HOA scare tactic. Don't worry, Jake. They have no case. They're trying to bully you into backing down." "You're sure?" "Absolutely. This is all smoke and mirrors. They would have to prove a legal easement exists, and we both know it doesn't. Plus, they'll have to justify why they're spending HOA funds on a lawsuit against someone who isn't even under their jurisdiction. That alone will come back to bite them. I'll file our response and prep for court." Jake nodded, feeling a renewed sense of confidence. If the HOA wanted a fight, he was ready. A month later, Jake sat in a stiff wooden chair inside a packed courtroom, his lawyer at his side. Across from them, Karen sat at the HOA's table, stone-faced and flanked by two other board members and their attorney. She was still fighting, still clinging to control, still refusing to admit defeat. The HOA's lawyer stood and made their argument. The pathway on Mr. Reynolds' property has been used as a community access point for decades. This constitutes what is known as a prescriptive easement. Removing access has disrupted the neighborhood and negatively impacted homeowners who rely on this route to reach the main road. Jake didn't even flinch. He had heard it all before. Lisa stood next, her tone calm and razor-sharp. "Your Honor, we strongly refute the claim of a prescriptive easement. My client's deed clearly states that the property is private land with no shared access agreements. There is no legal precedent for this path being recognized as a public right-of-way. Furthermore, the HOA's own governing documents make no mention of this path being a designated community feature. The HOA is attempting to enforce authority where it is not." She walked up to the judge and handed over Jake's deed, survey maps, and official statements from past property records. These documents confirm that Mr. Reynolds is the sole owner of the land in question. There is no record of a public easement, nor has there ever been legal action taken to establish one. His fence is fully compliant with local zoning laws, and the HOA has no jurisdiction over his property. Karen's lawyer shuffled his papers but said nothing. There was nothing he could say. The facts were indisputable. The judge adjusted his glasses, sighed, and turned to the HOA's side. "Do you have any official documentation that contradicts this?" A long silence followed. The HOA lawyer coughed. We were under the impression that long-term usage was sufficient to it." "It's not," the judge cut in. "Property law doesn't work on assumptions." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. The judge leaned forward. "The plaintiff has provided no legal evidence supporting their claims. As such, I am ruling in favor of the defendant. The fence is legal, the land is private, and the lawsuit is dismissed." Karen's face went pale. Jake exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. But the judge wasn't done. "I am also granting Mr. Reynolds' counterclaim for damages. The HOA is ordered to reimburse him for legal fees and emotional distress. This lawsuit was unnecessary and a misuse of resources." Jake turned his head just in time to see Karen's expression completely fall apart. The courtroom emptied quickly, but Karen didn't move. She sat there, staring at the table in front of her as if reality had just crashed down on her. She had lost. Badly. And the worst part? She had dragged the HOA down with her. Word spread fast. The lawsuit had cost the HOA thousands in legal fees, and when homeowners found out they were paying for Karen's personal vendetta, they were furious. Within a month, the HOA held a special vote, and Karen was removed from the board. Shortly after, a for sale sign appeared in front of her house. Jake wasn't surprised. She had spent years controlling this neighborhood, and now that her influence was gone, she had nothing left. In the weeks following the verdict, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The tension that had once filled the air seemed to ease, and neighbors who had previously avoided Jake started making small talk again. Some even apologized, admitting they had been pressured into siding with Karen. One evening, as Jake sat on his porch with a cold beer in hand, Beverly, a neighbor who had stayed out of the drama but had always been polite, walked up his driveway. "I just wanted to say, I think a lot of us were scared to go against Karen," she admitted. "She had a way of making people feel like they had to listen to her. But you stood your ground. You did what was right." Jake nodded, taking a sip of his beer. "It wasn't easy, but, yeah, it was worth it." She smiled. "Well, if you ever host a barbecue, I think you'd have a few more people willing to show up now." Jake chuckled. Noted. As the sun set over his quiet, peaceful yard, Jake looked at the fence that had started it all. It was just a fence. Wood, nails, nothing special. But what it represented was more than that. It was his boundary, his property, his right to live without interference. Karen had tried to bully him, threaten him, drag him into legal hell, and in the end, she had lost everything. Because facts don't care about control freaks. Jake leaned back in his chair, smirking to himself. This was his home, and no one would take that from him.